Okay, so in this part one of the tools, we're going to go over the top portion here of these tools, and I'm going to explain what each one of them do. And in the next part, we'll talk about each of the drop-down menus at the top. So let's begin here. Now, the select and link button, those are mostly commonly used with things like space warps, sort of like the bind to space warp. Let's see here. The select object allows you just to select an object. So real quickly, I'm going to create a box so you can kind of see what happens. So what we'll just do is just drag out a box real quick. Now, the select object here, when it's selected, you can select the object. You can't do anything more, just select it, as I'm demonstrating here. The select by name will pull up this scene right here, which will allow you to select from how many different objects you have. Obviously, you want to use good file naming conventions when actually building a scene, because poor naming conventions can result in hard time trying to find out, the different objects and where they are. Next is the rectangular selection region, and what that allows you to do is just make a marquee selection. Different selection styles allow you to do different things, sort of like if you need to select a certain amount of vertices in a cylindrical pattern. They have kind of a cookie cutter one where you can click and deselect, and that way you have a selection like that. They have a spray one where you can spray everything that you want. Like I said, each one of these has its own meaning. I always tell people that make sure Windows/crossing is not on, like this. Make sure it's off. The move function has two different ways of being used. One, you can just click it and move your object around, just as such. There's also the right-click method, which then opens up this box here, which you can then move an object, and if you actually know how you want your object to be positioned. The rotate button has the same thing as the right-click as well. It also can be rotated using basically the anchors, or pardon me, the compass. And you have the scale. Now, scale, there are actually three different versions. This one is the select a non-uniform scale, and what it does is it will scale uniformly if you use the center, but if you use the middle, it will scale differently than your regular scale function. Sort of, as you know, notice here, when I'm using these different angles here, it scales differently, but if I use all four, they all scale in the same direction. And this is the select and squash. What that does is it allows you to squash an object almost. Use this for round objects that you're trying to squash, I suppose. The more commonly one you want to use is select a uniform scale, just because it's better in my opinion. But I mean, some people use different ones. It's up to you. View allows you to change the different views here. Obviously, the pick button allows you to pick. Actually spent some time today forgetting where the pick button is, and there it is. Let's see here. The pivot points allow you to place a pivot where you want it at. So let's say I want to place, here we go, this object right here. Well, I can go E, and make sure I change that. And I can rotate holding down the shift, and it will create as many as I want. The pivot point. Let's see. Select and manipulate. We'll use that. Make sure that's deselected. The snap and toggle buttons I really don't use because just for my own reasons. It's, to me, kind of a knobbish thing to do. Mirror button allows you to mirror an object. You have to just select copy, and obviously you'll see a copy of it. You can also offset it if you'd like, you know, depending on how close or how far or how deep within you want it. You can change its positioning too by just changing the X and Y and Z values there, and it's created some stairs. Let's see here. Align tool, this is one of those tools that you have to be very careful using. I'll explain this in another tutorial. Manage layers I don't use. Here are the render setup. So you have render setup, which opens your render display dialog box. There's also just your quick render production, which just renders out what you have. You can also do that using the F9 key. Also remember W for move, E for rotate, R for scale, and Q for select object. That's the end of part 1, and we'll begin part 2 here in just a moment.